Welcome back. Chapter 14. We're talking about the brain today. It's a sunny Sunday here. Who knows what day it is if you're looking at this. And we are getting it done here, guys. So, yay for us. It's just weird to have to take a shower and do my hair and put on normal clothes so I can record a video on lectures because I can't seem to have my act together to do it during the week. So Sunday is what we have. All right, so this is chapter 14, lecture 1. And chapter 14 is on the brain and the cranial nerves. So we don't do the cranial nerves at all. So we're really just doing kind of 2/3 or maybe even half of the chapter. So, okay. Let's get this party started. So let's put me where I need to be. Pull up the PowerPoint. And I'll be honest, I don't go through the brain and every little bit of it. I just kind of give you an overview of the anatomy. Okay, We'll focus on the anatomy and then the functions. There's so much cross-functionality and kind of inter-communication. It's just way too complicated, and I don't want to make your head explode. I think I already have. So I'm going to try to watch the clock and stop and not make super-duper long videos, but I don't know what that means. I am prepared. I've taken 3 pages of notes on what I want to tell you. I wish you could just see the notes and I'll stop recording, but I know it doesn't work like that. So, the brain. The first thing to know about the brain is don't be afraid of it. We will figure it out. And always go back to the basics. So, we're going to talk about the regions of the brain. We're going to talk about cerebrospinal fluid and the protection of the brain, because that's really important. And then the different parts of the brain that you need to know and their functions. Alrighty. So let's see. When we talk about the brain, there are 4 major regions. I'm just going to hammer through these PowerPoints. I think that's going to just keep us on task. And I have a wicked headache, so it's going to be fun. All right. The brain is divided into the cerebrum. And the cerebrum, maybe you've heard the word like cerebral cortex. That is part of the cerebrum. I can't talk today, I see that. And that's the largest part of the brain. When you think of the brain, that's the major region that you think of. This is all cerebrum, this major area here. Then we have the diencephalon. So the diencephalon consists of the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. I don't know why that's not on there. And this is, the thalamus is right in the middle. This is, come on. This is, I'm just trying to find, right here is the hypothalamus, which makes this area up here be the epithalamus. So it's kind of this, I always have to rant myself, is the diencephalon. And then I have the brainstem. The brainstem includes the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. So the brainstem, right, is the part that's connected to the spinal cord. So if this is the spinal cord right here, the first part of the brainstem is the medulla oblongata. Then I go to this region here, and that's the pons. And then right below the thalamus is the midbrain. And that's all part of the brainstem. And the 4th region is the cerebellum. And the cerebellum I like to call the bun in the back. It's this, and it's kind of like angel hair pasta, super tight spaghetti looking, right at the back of your skull. Still encased in your skull, right? So your medulla oblongata is sticking out of through that foramen magnum. Well, and then we have the spinal cord, which we're not going to be talking about. We're only talking about the brain. And so here's the medulla, like I said, and then of the spinal cord, you have these enlargements where you have the nerves for the arms and the legs coming off. You have the horse's tail part, the cauda equina, down in the lumbar region where it starts to lose its cord-like appearance, and that's where people would do a lumbar puncture down in the lumbar region. Imagine that. And that's what we have going on. All right. So we're going to be talking about those 4 regions, but before we dive into that, I got to pause for a second. Sorry about that, guys. I had to take some migraine medication because I'm really struggling here today. But I'm going to see if it kicks in. So I made myself a cup of tea. You probably didn't know there was a weird little delay, but there was. So this is just the perfect size cup. It's not like I really think I am the best teacher ever. But it just makes a perfect ratio of sugar and milk and tea, and it tastes wonderful. So it's not like I'm trying to go whoop whoop. It's one of my favorite mugs. That student gave me, which is always awkward when students give you gifts because you're not supposed to take them, and I take them. And I'm just like, thanks, but thanks. So anyway, it's always one of those awkward gestures that, I love my students, so I accept their gifts. We'll just leave it at that. All right, I'm babbling because I'm waiting for my medication to kick in, and it takes more than 3.5 minutes. So we talked about the 4 major regions of the brain: the diencephalon, the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. So before we dive into specifics on that, we're going to be talking about the brain overall and how it's protected in your head. Well, we already talked about the 4 parts. I guess I should have shown this slide when I was yammering. Okay, so the first thing that you will have is you will have the skull. And the skull is obviously the bone that your brain is encased. My friend has a disorder where her brain is falling through her foramen magnum. I can't remember the name of the disorder. So she gets weird things because it puts pressure on her brainstem where there's not supposed to be. But for the most part, that's, the hardest protection that we have. Once we go deep to the bone, you will find 3 layers of connective tissue coverings on the brain. I'm trying to find the pen here. Here it is. And these are the meninges. So when you hear that someone has meningitis, it's an inflammation of these outer coverings. So there's 3 protective coverings. And they, from the brain to the spinal cord, they're continuous. All right. And the other thing that happens is that your brain is encased in fluid. It's floating. And it's not blood. It's called cerebrospinal fluid. And this cerebrospinal fluid is shock absorbing, hopefully. Oh, hello, little miss. I'm going to have a visitor. Are you trying to say hello? Yeah. Goofy girl. I guess she's mad I'm ignoring her. I'm petting her. But the other thing to think of is your brain is floating. Because if it wasn't floating, then gravity would be causing the top parts of your brain to be putting pressure on the bottom parts of your brain that are resting against the skull, and those cells would be damaged. So it is important that your brain floats. Makes me think of that Stephen King It. We all float down here. But anyway, moving on. I guess my medicine's kicking in. So what we have, I want to see for a second. Okay. So this is a picture, and first you'll have, so this is obviously the front of the skull because there's the eye orbits. I was going to say eye holes, but then I decided to be technical. And the frontal bone. So when you have the frontal bone, right, that is bone right here, flat bone. And then you have the first outermost heavy duty layer is called the dura mater. So dura is Latin for tough, and mater isn't that I forgot the second T, it's actually Latin for mother. So the dura mater is one tough mother, and I kind of feel like I'm dura mater because I'm one tough mother. That's this outermost one that puts the brain like in a sack. And if you come to lab, which you probably won't, I have brains with the dura mater, so you have to cut through this sack. And this sack encases it, separates it, tries to keep it healthy. The next layer in is the arachnoid matter, and it's this purpley guy if you are able to see color. And arachnoid, it means spider, so it's kind of like a filmy, spider webby layer. And it still kind of goes over all the ridges and the grooves in the brain. And this is where blood supply goes up to. And the next layer in is the pia mater. And pia is like delicate. I almost want to say fancy, but it's delicate. And the pia mater lines every nook and cranny. It's continuous with the outer surface of the brain. So it goes in and out all of those grooves. Now there's a couple more things I want to talk about. The arachnoid matter has these projections. So these projections off the arachnoid matter that go through the dura mater are called arachnoid villi. Right, so those are projections off arachnoid. My dog is snoring. Oh, come at you. Projections off. I thought it was like, I was just about to say, wow, I was doing good. But now we know I'm not. Projections off the dura, after the arachnoid matter, through the dura mater, actually into a venous supply. We'll talk about why that's important. Now we have other regions associated with the meninges that have their own name. So the space between the dura mater and the arachnoid mater is a subdural space. I know this isn't going to come out. The space between the arachnoid mater and the pia mater is the subarachnoid space. I'm going to pretend that I wrote the word, I didn't. And actually the space between the dura and the bone, this space is the epidural space. I had an epidural injection when I was in labor to numb the pains of labor, and that's where they do it in your lumbar region, but they do an epidural in the epidural space. Okay. So the dura mater, the outermost layer, the strongest stents, separated by the epidural space to the bone of the arachnoids with this. So it's dura mater. Let's do this. So let's do this actually. So it's the epidural space after we have bone to the dura mater, to the subdural space, to the arachnoid mater, to the subarachnoid space, to the pia mater. And that's cool. And then don't forget we also have those arachnoid villi projections. Okay. I think I've talked about all of that. Oh, so here's the spaces. Okay, so I don't have anything to say. You can go back and read that on your own. Extensions of the dura mater. The dura mater has these folds and chunks of tissue protecting the brain. That's what I'm going to call it because we just cut through all that with scissors. Now let's talk about blood supply. So we had the blood-brain barrier. Blood is not, oh that scared me, in the middle of the brain. It's that cerebrospinal fluid that I talked about that allows it to float. But I need a constant supply of blood. It can't be interrupted because I need to bring the oxygen and the glucose. I don't have a lot of storage capacity for the nutrients and oxygen to make ATP because remember, those sodium potassium pumps are working constantly, and then remove the waste and carbon dioxide, because if I keep them, then the environment becomes acidic, and that will kill cells. So it's very important to have that constant flushing out of the waste and carbon dioxide. And so I have blood going in via the carotid arteries and other vertebral arteries, the circle of Willis. I have blood coming out via these. Sinus is just kind of a really fat blob of a vein, and the jugular veins are bringing blood away from the brain. Okay. Do you want to say anything else about that? I don't think so. Okay. So, even though the brain is a tiny proportion of your body, it's getting 20% of the oxygen. So, if I don't have that constant supply of oxygen, I am going to have altered brain function. And if I have screwed up glucose levels, too high, too low, that is also going to alter my consciousness, my brain activity, right? People are confused, dizzy, unconscious because they're in some sort of diabetic coma. Too much glucose, not enough glucose. Do they give themselves too much insulin and pull too much glucose out of their blood? It's all sorts of, it's very sensitive. The brain is very sensitive, so we have a lot of different central, meaning in the brain, chemoreceptors detecting levels of everything. All right, so we were talking about the blood-brain barrier, and it exists over the majority of all of the blood. Is that what I'm talking about next? Yeah. Oh, the brain is only 2% of your body weight. I think I'm looking at my notes now. Okay, so and the blood-brain barrier is designed to be protective. So what can cross? Well, glucose can cross, oxygen can cross, carbon dioxide can cross, anesthetics can cross, alcohol. And alcohol, well, affects many different parts of your brain. I hope I remember to talk about the one because I thought that was pretty interesting. And some other substances. Most antibiotics cannot cross. So if you have an infection in your brain, it's really hard to get to it. Toxins typically can't cross, and proteins can't cross. They're too big. So that just means, most drugs that you have are protein-based. And if proteins can't cross, then the blood-brain barrier is going to make it so these types of drugs can't cross. So we have to figure out how to get them across that blood-brain barrier. And obviously, if I have injury, it's going to affect the blood-brain barrier. There are certain regions of your brain that don't have this. Here's some other things. What can pass? Hold on. Glucose, alcohol, some other substances. I made some notes here. Nicotine can also cross. Obviously, water can cross. I'm going to have to remember to do this. Caffeine can cross. That's why the extra strength Excedrin has caffeine in it. Barbiturates can also cross. I don't know my drugs. I'm just going to call them barbiturates. Don't ask me, what's a specific one. Steroids, because they're small lipid-soluble structures, can also cross. So there's a good amount of items that can cross. But if you're a big, chunky, clunky protein, that is not going to happen. So having said that, I don't have blood in my brain. I have this cerebrospinal fluid. So what's going to happen, I want to find this picture. We're going to go back to those other pictures because they're kind of important. But I want to talk about this other part. So when we have these blood capillaries in the brain, special capillaries are going to join up with, so it's a capillary, it's astrocytes. Are they labeled? Oh, we're just going to call it pia mater. And then I have these ependymal cells. So the blood has all the stuff I need, And the contents have to go through, tight junctions, not going between, has to go through the ependymal cells. So the ependymal cells will let everything that is supposed to be present to take care of the brain through. So the ependymal cells are joined up with these blood capillaries, and together they make a very special structure called a choroid plexus. And the choroid plexus, so it's blood capillary and ependymal cells, they make cerebrospinal fluid, CSF. Okay, so I wanted to go to this one just to say, so as stuff is passing through the ependymal cells, it will then enter into these holes in the brain. Okay, these holes in the brain are called ventricles. And there's 4. So you have 4 ventricles in the brain. Don't confuse them with the ventricles in your heart. And in each ventricle, there is these clusters of these special capillaries and ependymal cells. So there's clusters of choroid plexus in each one. And we usually pick them out with forceps. They're these weird little chunks of, like, I don't know, they just look like blobs. They almost look like, what's that stuff you guys eat that I don't like? It's just, I don't know, super healthy and it's disgusting and it looks like mush. It's some sort of nut paste or something. I don't know. All right, I'm babbling. Anyway, it looks like these blobs, but, they're pretty formed and you pick them out. So I've got these holes in the brain where the ventricles are present, and in the ventricles are the choroid plexus making cerebrospinal fluid. So let's go back. Cerebrospinal fluid. I guess we're good. So let's talk about the ventricles. There are 4 ventricles, but they're not called 1, 2, 3, and 4. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. No. They're called 2 lateral ventricles. I love talking about this stuff, so I'm starting to get into it. These lateral ventricles, each is in a cerebral hemisphere, a side of the brain. And then there's the 3rd ventricle, right smack dab in the middle. It's actually in the thalamus. And then there's a 4th ventricle. Where is it? It's labeled right here, and that's right here. So let's look at these guys. So this is kind of looking at the brain head on, but this is looking at the brain on this side. All right, so I have 2 lateral ventricles. They join the pathway of cerebrospinal fluid. Even though all 4 ventricles make it, the pathway then goes through this interventricular foramen to the 3rd ventricle, which is smack dab in the middle of the brain. And then I have the cerebral aqueduct bringing CSF to the 4th ventricle. All right. And the 4th, all ventricles do have choroid plexus, but the flow is one way. From the 4th ventricle, CSF will go into the spinal cord, or we'll go into a different location, but we're going to get to that. Okay. You make about 20 mils an hour of CSF. That's pretty cool. Have about 150 in your body at all times. So it's a one-way flow. So it's constantly being produced and constantly being drained. People are going to cry when they see the next slide. Oops. You know me, I'm all about pathways. Well, maybe you don't know that about me. Being produced and drained. Right? Because it's chock full of waste. It's taking all the garbage away from the cells in the brain, so they can't reuse it. We just dump it. It's like a single use only. Right? So what are my functions? Mechanical protection, because it's shock absorbing and it's causing my brain to float so that cells are not damaged by gravity. Chemical protection, because it's always bringing me the good stuff and taking away the bad stuff. And like I said, I have the ependymal cells with the capillaries that, come on you, that make the choroid plexus structure that will produce cerebrospinal fluid from the blood, just taking in the good stuff. Okay, so here's my pathway. Oh yes, we're doing it. Okay, so let's see. I feel so much better. We're going to start here first, and then we're going to look here. Okay, so the first thing I have all of the ventricles, the two lateral ventricles, the third ventricle and the fourth ventricle, choroid plexus, all making cerebrospinal fluid. So we're going to start with the flow at the lateral ventricles. If CSF is being produced in the lateral ventricles, it will go through the interventricular foramen to the third ventricle. It will go through the cerebral aqueduct to the fourth ventricle. And from the fourth ventricle, it's not nice. This doesn't have it all. That's kind of funny. From the fourth ventricle, it will either enter the central canal of the spinal cord, or it'll go and enter the subarachnoid space, the space between the arachnoid and the pia mater. It will go through those arachnoid villi and dump into the venous blood and then go back into just blood supply. So I'm constantly dumping it in, and then, oh hey, I have a constant supply of blood to the brain. All right, so let's look at these guys. So here is choroid plexus in a lateral ventricle. It'll go through this It'll go through this interventricular foramen to the third ventricle, and there's more choroid plexus. It'll go through the cerebral aqueduct to the fourth ventricle. So I want to point out the third ventricle is right in the middle of the thalamus. The fourth ventricle is between pons. This is pons right here. This is cerebellum. And here, right in the smack dab in the middle is a space, and that's my fourth ventricle. From there, it will either enter into the central canal in the spinal cord and flush its way, or it will go through a special opening called aperture into the subarachnoid space. I'm in the subarachnoid space, floating around this little out arachnoid villi into a venous blood supply, and then out of the body. So we had, let's look at all this. Choroid plexus. Cerebrum, I was just telling you, the big part of the brain, the cerebral aqueduct, cerebellum, fourth ventricle, pons, fourth ventricle. Why do I have the fourth ventricle? Oh, central canal. Yeah, we talked about all this. Subarachnoid space, arachnoid villi. There's another couple things that we worked through, okay? Other parts are just orienting you on the location of the brain. Always find the cerebellum, that's the bun in the back. So that means that this, when I look at it, is the back of your head, and this is the front of your head. Okay. Here it is, just looking at it from a different angle. The two lateral ventricles to the third ventricle via the interventricular foramen, to the cerebral aqueduct, to the fourth ventricle, down the central canal. It's not really showing you the subarachnoid space all that well. I'm kind of crappy. All right, so let's see what's next. Yeah, let's stop here right now. This is kind of the protection, the brain, the flow of CSF, and we will pick up with starting to talk about parts of the brain.